I am Julian, 30 years old. For the last 3 years, I worked 16-hour days in Tokyo, sacrificing my sleep, my health, and my youth to pay off the mortgage on my $750,000 home back in Texas. But when I finally flew back, exhausted and ready to sleep in my own bed, I found a stranger living in my house. My own brother had secretly sold my property while I was across the world. When I confronted my parents, my mother looked me dead in the eye and told me to stop being greedy, claiming my hard-earned home was a family asset to fund my brother's lifestyle. They laughed in my face, wearing designer clothes bought with my blood, sweat, and tears. They called the police to have me removed from my own porch in front of the entire neighborhood. But there was one thing they did not know. They thought they had covered their tracks with a perfect legal document. They had no idea I possessed a single, undeniable piece of federal evidence that was about to turn their real estate windfall into a massive federal lawsuit, landing my golden child brother in handcuffs. And right now, they are the ones begging for mercy while facing absolute financial ruin. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's web of lies, please hit the like button if you believe in ruthless justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the moment the nightmare began. 13 hours in a cramped metal tube flying over the Pacific Ocean does strange things to a man's mind. By the time the wheels of my commercial flight hit the tarmac at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones over the past 36 months was physically heavy. But as I walked through the terminal, hearing the familiar Texas drawl of the customs agents, the weight began to lift. I was finally home. My time in Japan as a financial engineer was nothing short of brutal. I lived in a tiny, hyper-efficient apartment that felt more like a storage closet. I practically lived on spreadsheets, analyzing corporate debt structures and market volatility until my eyes bled. I missed Thanksgiving dinners. I missed normal weekends. I missed having a life. But I did it all for one specific reason: the salary. The massive overseas compensation package allowed me to pay off every single cent of the mortgage on my sanctuary. My house. It was not just a building to me. It was a sprawling, 4-bedroom suburban fortress in a quiet, affluent neighborhood, valued at $750,000. I bought it 5 years ago, putting down every dollar I had saved since my college days. It was the absolute first thing in my life that was truly mine. Growing up, I never had things that were just mine. I had things that were ours, which inevitably meant they belonged to my older brother, Felix. But this house was my flag in the ground. It was my proof that I had made it. I hauled my 2 heavy suitcases through the airport. They were packed with expensive gifts for my family. I brought a premium skincare set for my mother, Martha, and a top-tier golf club for my father, Richard. I even brought a limited edition watch for Felix, despite our rocky history. I genuinely wanted to believe that 3 years of distance had healed old wounds. I wanted to believe that coming home meant I could finally rest and be welcomed. I grabbed my rental car, a generic white sedan smelling faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, and hit the highway. The Texas heat was a physical force pressing against the windshield, but I rolled the window down anyway, letting the thick, humid air blast my face. My heart was actually racing. I pictured walking through my heavy oak front door, smelling the polished wood floors, and standing in the absolute silence of my backyard. I had left a spare key with my parents. The agreement was incredibly simple. They would check on the place once a month, flush the toilets, run the taps, and make sure the pipes did not freeze during the winter. In exchange, I paid for their landscaping service and all their utilities remotely. I had not told them the exact day I was coming back. I wanted to surprise them. I pulled into my subdivision. The neighborhood looked pristine. I turned the final corner, my eyes scanning for my house number. I slammed on the brakes. I sat there in the middle of the street, the rental car idling, staring at my driveway in pure confusion. There was a massive, shiny black SUV parked right where my car usually went. It had a bumper sticker on the back about an honor roll student. My first thought was rational. I figured maybe my parents were here checking on the place, or maybe they bought a new car. But that made zero sense. My father drove the same beat-up truck for 20 years, and my mother drove a small sedan. I parked across the street and stepped out. As I walked up the driveway, the wrongness of the scene multiplied. The expensive rose bushes I had planted by the porch were entirely gone, replaced by cheap, low-maintenance shrubs. The custom black metal mailbox had been torn down and replaced with a generic brick pillar. But the thing that made my stomach drop into my shoes was the front door. I reached into my pocket and gripped the brass key I had carried with me every single day in Tokyo. As I looked at the door handle, I realized my key was completely useless. The standard deadbolt was gone. It had been replaced by a high-tech, touchscreen electronic smart lock glowing a soft blue in the afternoon shade. Panic, cold and sharp, started to prick at the back of my neck. I thought maybe my parents had rented it out behind my back to pocket some extra cash. I was furious at the thought, but a rogue tenant was a fixable problem. I stepped onto the porch and rang the doorbell. The door swung open. Standing there was a man I had never seen in my life. He looked to be in his mid-50s, wearing a polo shirt and khaki shorts, holding a half-eaten sandwich. He looked at me with mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stared past him into the hallway. My hallway, the custom painting I had hung on the left wall, was gone. The walls were painted a hideous beige color. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice rough. The man frowned, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Excuse me? You rang my doorbell, buddy. I think the question is, who are you?" "I am Julian, and this is my house. What are you doing inside?" The man stopped chewing. His eyes narrowed. "Your house? Look, I do not know what you are selling, but I suggest you step off my porch." "I am not selling anything," I snapped, adrenaline flooding my system. "I own this property. I have been overseas for work. I just got back. Who are you, and why are you in my house?" The man let out a short, incredulous laugh. "My name is Mr. Harrison, and I bought this house 2 weeks ago, paid cash. So unless you are the ghost of Christmas past, you need to get the hell off my property before I call the cops." "Bought it." The words echoed in my head like a gunshot. "That is impossible," I stammered. "I did not sell it. My name is on the deed. Look it up." Mr. Harrison's face hardened. He was done being polite. I sat at a closing table. I signed the papers. "I have the title insurance. Now, get lost." He tried to slam the door, but I instinctively put my hand out to stop it. It was a massive mistake. Mr. Harrison roared, dropped his sandwich, and pulled out his phone. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up to the curb with its lights flashing. Neighbors I barely recognized started coming out of their houses, staring at me like I was a common burglar. Officer Jenkins walked up the driveway, his hand resting near his belt. "Settle down. What is the problem here?" "This lunatic is trying to break into my house," Harrison spat. "Claims he owns it." "I do own it," I pleaded, pulling out my passport and my Texas driver's license. "Officer, look, this has been my address for 5 years. I just got back from the airport." The officer looked at my ID, then at Harrison. Harrison disappeared inside and came back with a thick blue folder. The deed of sale. Closing date, 10 days ago. Recorded with the county. The officer took the papers, scanned them, and walked back to his cruiser to run a check. When the officer came back, he looked at me with pity. Pity meant I had already lost. "Sir," Officer Jenkins said firmly, "according to county records, this property was legally transferred to Mr. Harrison. You are the previous owner. Legally, this house belongs to him. You are trespassing. Get in your vehicle and leave, or I will arrest you." I looked at Harrison. He was smirking. I looked at the house, my sanctuary. I had absolutely no choice. I walked back to my rental car, my legs feeling like lead. I reversed out of the street, watching a stranger slam my own front door shut. I drove to a rundown motel 3 blocks away. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed my brother, Felix. He answered on the 3rd ring. I could hear the clinking of silverware in the background. "Julian?" We did not think you were coming back for another month, Felix said, his voice entirely flat. No surprise, no joy. There is a stranger living in my house, Felix, I said, gripping the steering wheel. He says he bought it. What is going on? Felix sighed, sounding incredibly irritated. Look, do not freak out. I handled it. Handled it? You sold my house. I cashed out, Felix said casually. The market was at a peak. It was a smart play. I got a cash offer closed in 2 weeks. You should be thanking me. I saved you the realtor fees. I was hyperventilating. You stole my house. How did you even sign for it? Mom and Dad said it was fine. He deflected. Hold on. Put Mom on. A second later, my mother's sharp voice pierced my ear. Julian, why are you yelling at your brother? He is trying to have dinner. He sold my house, Mom. My $750,000 house. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Martha snapped. It was a family asset. You know how we operate. We share. Your brother was in a tight spot. He needed capital for a huge business venture. You have that fancy job in Japan making all that money. You can just buy another one. The sheer entitlement hit me like a physical blow. A family asset? I paid for it. Every dime. And who raised you? She countered viciously. Who fed you? Now that you are successful, you think you are better than us? You think you can just hoard wealth while your brother struggles? Do not make a big deal out of this. We are family. I am going to the police, I whispered. You wouldn't dare, Martha hissed. You send the police after your own brother, and you are dead to us. Dead. She hung up. I sat in the silent, suffocating heat of the rental car. The scream that tore out of my throat was primal. They had not just stolen my real estate. They had cashed out my trust, my safety, and my sanity. I checked into the motel. The room smelled of mildew and cheap lemon cleaner. I threw my suitcases on the bed, the very suitcases filled with expensive gifts for the people who had just robbed me blind. That night, I lay on the lumpy mattress staring at the water-stained ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Harrison's smug face, or heard my mother's voice calling me greedy for wanting to keep my own property. As the hours crawled by in the dark, the memories came flooding back. The realization hit me like a freight train. This betrayal did not start with the house. This was just the grand finale of a lifelong dynamic. The pattern had always been right in front of me, but I had been too desperate for their love to see it. Felix was the golden child. He was the handsome, charismatic firstborn who could do absolutely no wrong. I was the second son, the afterthought, the one expected to be quiet and accommodating. I vividly remembered being 10 years old. I had saved my meager allowance for 6 entire months, doing neighborhood chores, raking leaves and walking dogs, just to buy a handheld game console. It was my prized possession. 2 weeks after I bought it, it vanished. I spent days tearing my room apart. I finally found it shoved under Felix's bed. The screen was completely shattered, cracked right down the middle. I ran to my father, Richard, crying and holding the broken plastic. My father barely looked up from his newspaper. He did not mean to break it, Julian. He just wanted to play. You should have shared it with him in the first place. When you hide things from your brother, it makes him curious. I was the selfish one for buying something with my own money. Felix was the victim because he wanted it. That was the family rule. It got worse as we got older. When I was 16, I worked grueling summer shifts at a local diner to buy my first car. It was a beat-up Honda, but it was mine. I paid for the car, the insurance, and the gas. Felix, who was 20 at the time, had just lost his license due to a DUI. One night, while I was asleep, he took my keys off the kitchen counter. He went on a joyride with his friends and wrapped my car around a telephone pole, totaling it completely. I remember walking into the hospital emergency room, terrified. Felix was sitting on a bed with a broken arm, laughing with the nurses. My mother, Martha, rushed past me, completely ignoring the fact that I was trembling. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were full of venom. Why did you leave your keys out where he could see them? she demanded loudly in the middle of the hospital hallway. You know he is going through a hard time without his license. This is your fault, Julian. You tempted him. My fault. It was always my fault. I spent the next 2 years taking the bus to school while my parents dipped into their meager savings to buy Felix a new truck, claiming he needed it more for his job interviews. I spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth. I thought if I just became successful enough, wealthy enough, generous enough, they would finally respect me. I put myself through college on scholarships and student loans. I studied financial engineering while Felix bounced from one failed get-rich-quick scheme to another. I started sending my parents money from my first real paycheck. I bought the sprawling 4-bedroom house specifically so we could host Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings there. I wanted to be the provider. When the opportunity in Tokyo came up, I took it because the salary was astronomical. I knew it would allow me to clear the massive mortgage debt in record time. I remember sitting in a high-rise office in Shinjuku at 3 in the morning, chugging my 4th cup of black coffee. My colleague Simon, a guy who worked just as hard as I did, looked over at me from his terminal. "Why do you push yourself like this, man?" Simon asked. "You look like a walking corpse." "I have a house back in Texas," I told him, rubbing my bloodshot eyes. "It is my brick shield. Once it is paid off, nobody can ever take my security away." "Family asset," I whispered to my reflection. I picked up my phone. I was not going to scream anymore. I was not going to beg or write emotional paragraphs. I was going to treat this exactly like what it was. This was not a family dispute. This was a massive financial crime. I knew how to read contracts. I knew how to follow the money. And I knew exactly where my family would be this morning. Every Sunday morning for the last 2 decades, Richard, Martha, and Felix went to a local diner called the Golden Skillet for the all-you-can-eat pancake special. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my keys, and drove to the diner. I pulled into the parking lot at 9 in the morning. Sure enough, my father's old truck was parked near the entrance. But right next to it was something that made my blood run freezing cold. It was a brand new, custom-ordered Porsche 911 Turbo S. It was gleaming in the morning sun, a $150,000 piece of German engineering. And sitting on the dashboard was a handicap placard I knew belonged to my mother. They bought a Porsche with my house. I took a deep breath, pushing the rage down into a tight, controlled box in my mind. I walked through the glass doors of the diner. The bell jingled loudly. The heavy smell of bacon, maple syrup, and cheap black coffee hit me instantly. I scanned the crowded booths. There they were, sitting in a large corner booth. Richard, Martha, Felix, and Felix's wife, Stella. They were laughing uproariously. Stella was holding up her wrist, showing off a thick, glittering diamond tennis bracelet that caught the diner's fluorescent lights. Felix was digging into a massive stack of waffles, looking completely carefree. They were celebrating my financial ruin. I did not hesitate. I walked straight up to their booth. I did not say hello. I just stood there, casting a tall, dark shadow over their breakfast feast. The laughter died instantly. Stella dropped her wrist, her eyes widening. Richard cleared his throat nervously, picking up his coffee mug with trembling hands. But Felix just looked up, a dab of syrup on his chin. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed that I was ruining the mood. "Jesus, Julian. You look like hell," Felix said smoothly. "Sit down. Order some coffee. The pancakes are on me." "Where is the money?" I asked. My voice was dangerously low, completely devoid of emotion. Richard looked around the diner, his face flushing red. "Now, son, let's not make a scene. People are eating. We can talk about this at home." "I do not have a home," I stated flatly. "You sold it. $750,000. Where is the money?" Stella let out a loud, theatrical scoff. She dabbed her perfectly painted lips with a napkin. Stella was 32, a woman who spent her entire life chasing status and pretending to be wealthy on social media. Her eyes were always calculating the price tag of everything in the room. "The money has been invested, Julian," Stella said with a smug, condescending smile. Felix has a brilliant business plan. We are diversifying into offshore logistics and some high-yield assets. We are going to triple the money in 6 months. You will get your share back with interest eventually. Honestly, you should be thanking him for managing your assets while you abandoned us to go live in Japan. Managing my assets? I repeated, my tone razor-sharp. You sold real estate that did not belong to you. He forged my signature on the deed. Felix rolled his eyes dramatically. He reached down into a brand-new leather designer briefcase sitting on the booth seat next to him. He pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper and slid it across the sticky diner table. I did not forge anything, little brother, Felix said, leaning back with a victorious smirk. You signed this before you left for Tokyo. Remember? Power of attorney, giving me full, unhindered rights to handle your real estate portfolio. I picked up the paper. The header read, General Durable Power of Attorney. It granted Felix total control over my finances, my accounts, and my property in the state of Texas. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a signature. It looked terrifyingly accurate. The sharp loops of the J, the exact angle of the L's. If I had not known with absolute certainty that I never signed it, I would have believed it was mine. Look at the date, Stella chimed in, crossing her arms. October 27th, 3 years ago. Fully notarized, witnessed, and filed with the county clerk. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I am taking a picture of this. Go right ahead, Felix laughed, taking a massive bite of his waffle. Take a video if you want. It is a legal, binding document. You cannot touch us, Julian. We did everything completely by the book. The house is gone. The money is in motion. Accept it. I snapped a high-resolution photo of the document, making sure the date, the signature, and the notary stamp were perfectly clear. I zoomed in on the notary seal. The name was Penelope Vance. You really think you can beat me with a fake piece of paper? I asked, looking directly into Felix's eyes. It is not fake. Martha suddenly snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Her face was twisted with fury. Stop attacking your brother. He is the only one who stayed here to take care of us while you were off eating sushi and forgetting where you came from. You are a selfish, ungrateful child. We raised you, and this is how you repay us? By threatening us in public. I looked at the 4 of them. They were a united front of delusion and greed. They truly believed they were untouchable. They believed that because I had always folded in the past, I would fold now. Enjoy the waffles, I said quietly, slipping my phone back into my pocket, and enjoy the Porsche outside, because this is the absolute last meal I am ever paying for. I turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. I could hear Stella scoffing loudly behind me, telling my mother that I was just throwing a tantrum. They thought that notarized piece of paper was their impenetrable shield. They had no idea it was the exact nail I needed for their coffin. I sat in my rental car in the diner parking lot and immediately started researching. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed a shark. A real estate litigation attorney who thrived on destroying people in court. I found Victor. His online reviews described him as a ruthless, aggressive litigator who did not play nice. I called his emergency line and booked a consultation for that exact afternoon. Walking into Victor's downtown office was intimidating. It was all glass, steel, and dark mahogany. Victor was a man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car. He had the cold, dead eyes of a man who only cared about winning. I sat across from him and laid out the entire story. I showed him the picture of the power of attorney. Victor leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. It is a massive mess, Julian. If that power of attorney holds up in court, you have a brutal uphill battle. Proving a signature is a forgery is incredibly difficult. Handwriting experts cancel each other out all the time. It becomes a he said she said situation, and judges hate that. It is not a he said she said, I said calmly. Look at the date on the document again. October 27th, 3 years ago. Okay, Victor said, raising an eyebrow. I see it. So, I reached into my bag and pulled out my passport. It was worn and filled with international stamps. I flipped to the back pages and placed the passport flat on Victor's mahogany desk, pointing to a specific red stamp. I flew out of Dallas on October 26th, I stated, my voice steady. It is a 13-hour flight, plus the massive time zone difference. I landed at Narita International Airport in Tokyo on October 27th. Victor leaned forward, putting on a pair of reading glasses. He stared intently at the passport. There it was, stamped in bright red ink by the Japanese government. Immigration Inspector, Narita Airport, October 27th. I was physically standing in a customs line in Japan at the exact moment this document was supposedly signed and notarized in Texas. I said, unless my brother can prove I learned how to teleport, that document is a complete fabrication. A slow, predatory smile spread across Victor's face. It was the smile of a wolf seeing a wounded deer. Julian, Victor said softly, taking off his glasses. That changes absolutely everything. This is no longer just a civil property dispute. This is undeniable federal proof of felony forgery. And because they used the banking system to transfer the funds from the sale, it is wire fraud. We are talking about serious prison time. Can we get the house back? I asked. We are going to do much more than that, Victor said, picking up his desk phone. If that document is void, the real estate sale is void ab initio. The deed transfer is entirely invalid. But first, we need to stop the cash from disappearing. I am filing for an emergency ex parte injunction today. We will freeze every single bank account associated with Felix and Stella. Victor looked at me, his expression turning dead serious. Are you absolutely ready for this? Because once I file these motions, there is no going back. You are going to war with your blood. This is the nuclear option. I thought about the broken game console. I thought about the crashed Honda. I thought about my mother yelling at me in the hospital. I thought about my 3 years in Tokyo, bleeding for a family that viewed me as an ATM. Push the button, I said. The next 48 hours moved at a blistering, chaotic pace. Victor was worth every single penny of his exorbitant retainer fee. He filed the emergency motions with the court, presenting the passport stamp as prima facie evidence of fraud. The judge instantly granted a temporary restraining order and a massive asset freeze on Felix and Stella. While Victor handled the court, I needed to know where my money went. I called my friend Clara, a brilliant cybersecurity analyst I knew from my tech circles. I gave her the details of the property sale, and she started legally tracing the public financial footprints and property records. I was sitting in Victor's office when Clara called me back. I put her on speakerphone. Hey Julian, are you sitting down? Clara asked, her voice tight. Just give it to me straight, I said. How much of the $750,000 is left? Well, Clara sighed. The good news is, the court freeze successfully locked down about $300,000 in their primary joint account. The bad news is, the rest is gone. Gone where? Victor asked, his pen hovering over a legal pad. They did not invest in a logistics business, Clara explained. Unless the business is offshore gambling. I am seeing massive sequential wire transfers to 3 different online poker and sports betting sites within 48 hours of the real estate closing. Felix blew roughly $400,000 gambling. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of sheer nausea. $400,000. My blood, my sweat, my missed holidays. Gambled away on a laptop in a matter of days. What about the rest? I asked, my voice hollow. $70,000 for the down payment on that Porsche 911 Turbo S. Clara listed off. $50,000 for a down payment on a luxury Mastercraft wakeboard boat. And about $30,000 used to immediately pay off Stella's credit cards, which looked like they were maxed out at Louis Vuitton and Chanel. I looked at Victor. My brother is a severe gambling addict. I knew he liked playing cards, but I never knew it was this pathological. He was chasing massive losses, Victor analyzed, shaking his head. He probably thought he could take your house money, double it on a sure thing, pay you back a small cut to keep you quiet and keep the massive profit. When he lost the first 100 grand, he panicked and kept betting bigger to recover. We had the smoking gun. We had the money trail. Legally, we were invincible. But I had forgotten one crucial detail. My family did not fight with logic or law. They fought in the mud using public manipulation. That evening, back in my miserable motel room, my phone started exploding with notifications. I opened Facebook. I rarely used it, but my account was still active. I had 50 new tags in the span of an hour. I clicked the first notification. It led to a video post by Stella. She was sitting in her newly renovated kitchen, sobbing hysterically into the camera. It was a masterful, Oscar-worthy performance of victimhood. "Friends, family," Stella wailed, wiping away fake tears. "I do not normally bring private matters to the internet, but we are under attack. My brother-in-law, Julian, came back from Japan a changed, cruel man. He gave Felix permission to sell his old house to help us start a family business. But now that he sees how successful we are becoming, he got jealous. He is suing us. He maliciously froze our bank accounts. We cannot even buy groceries. He is trying to put his own flesh and blood on the street out of pure spite. Please, pray for us." The comments were a toxic cesspool of judgment. My Aunt Beatrice wrote, "Wow, what a scumbag brother. Money truly ruins people." A cousin I had not seen in 10 years commented, "Julian always thought he was better than everyone else. Stay strong, Stella." My blood boiled. They were entirely rewriting reality. In their twisted narrative, I was the villain destroying a loving family. They weaponized my private nature against me. I typed out a furious, evidence-filled paragraph, ready to post the passport photo and the gambling records. But my thumb hovered over the send button. I deleted the text. No, I was not going to fight them in the comments section of Facebook. I was going to slaughter them in a court of law, where likes did not matter and perjury carried a prison sentence. The next morning, a frantic pounding on my motel door woke me up. I looked through the peephole. It was Richard and Martha, my parents. I unlocked the door but left the safety chain engaged. "What do you want?" "Let us in, Julian," my father begged. He looked 10 years older. He was pale and trembling. "We need to talk, right now." I unlatched the chain and let them inside. The small room instantly felt suffocating. Martha sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her purse with white knuckles. Richard stood nervously by the window. I casually slipped my hand into my pocket and pressed record on my phone's voice memo app. "You have to stop this insanity," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. "The bank called. Everything is locked. Felix cannot access a single dime. The repo men came and towed the Porsche away this morning. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for your brother? In front of the entire neighborhood." "He stole my house, Dad," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "The car was bought with stolen money." "It was a misunderstanding," Martha shrieked, her mask slipping. "He was going to pay you back. Why do you have to be so vindictive? You are ruining his life over money." "He committed a federal felony," I stated. "Forgery. Wire fraud." "He is your brother," Richard shouted. "You do not put family in a courtroom. You drop this lawsuit right now, Julian. Unfreeze the accounts. We will work out a payment plan. Felix can pay you $500 a month." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. $500 a month? It would take him 125 years to pay me back the principal without interest. "No." Martha stood up, her face twisted with pure rage. "If you go through with this, Julian, if you make your brother a criminal, we will never forgive you. You will have no parents. You will be entirely alone in this world." "I think I made peace with that reality a long time ago," I said softly. Then I decided to spring the trap. "Did you know?" I asked quietly, looking back and forth between them. "Did you know the signature on the power of attorney was fake?" Richard let out a heavy sigh, aggressively rubbing his temples. He was tired and sloppy. "We knew he was practicing your signature, Julian. We saw him doing it at the kitchen table. But we thought it was just to speed the paperwork up. We knew you would have signed it anyway to help him if you were here. It was just a formality. Gotcha. So you sat there, watched him forge my legal signature, and you did absolutely nothing? I asked, ensuring the audio picked up every word clearly. We were helping the family survive. Martha screamed defensively. Get out, I said, pointing to the door. Julian, please, Richard started. Get out. I pushed the door open. They stared at me with undisguised hatred, then finally walked out into the Texas heat. As the door clicked shut, I pulled my phone out and stopped the recording. I had the confession. My parents were legally complicit. The trap was set and they had walked right into it. The storm was fully here, and I was holding all the lightning. The confession I had covertly recorded in that suffocating, mildew-scented motel room was the golden key to my liberation. But my attorney, Victor, was a man who left absolutely nothing to chance. He knew that in high-stakes federal litigation, you do not just secure the perimeter. You salt the earth so your enemies can never grow back. We had the irrefutable money trail traced by Clara. We had the federal passport stamp proving my physical presence in Tokyo. And we had the audio recording of my parents admitting they watched my brother practice forging my legal signature. But Victor recognized that there were 2 wildcard players still left on the board, and we needed to neutralize them before we dropped the ultimate bomb in front of a judge. The first wildcard was Mr. Harrison, the man currently living in my house. Harrison had already retained aggressive legal counsel and filed a vicious countersuit against me for harassment, trespassing, and slander of title. He genuinely believed that I was a sophisticated scam artist trying to extort him after legally selling him a piece of prime real estate. He was furious, completely dug into his position, and ready to drag me through a grueling, years-long civil battle. Victor, however, saw an opportunity. He reached out to Harrison's attorney and demanded a private, strictly off-the-record sit-down at our firm's downtown office. The meeting was set for a rainy Tuesday morning. Victor and I sat in the firm's largest conference room. The walls were made of thick, soundproof glass overlooking the gray Dallas skyline. The massive mahogany table in the center of the room felt like a battlefield waiting for its generals. When Mr. Harrison walked in, he looked like a man ready for a physical brawl. He was flanked by a severe-looking attorney carrying a thick briefcase. Harrison glared at me from across the polished wood. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping in his cheeks. He was a proud, hard-working man, someone who had spent decades saving up to buy a beautiful home in a pristine neighborhood, and he absolutely did not like being told his sanctuary was a criminal illusion. This is a massive waste of my time, and I am only here because my counsel advised it, Harrison growled, aggressively dropping his leather folder onto the table. I bought that house fair and square. I have the title insurance. I have the keys. I have the deed recorded with the county clerk. I do not know what kind of sick game you and your brother are playing, Julian, but I am not moving out of my home. If you step foot on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Victor did not raise his voice. He did not blink. He simply leaned forward, his custom-tailored suit perfectly unwrinkled, and slid a thick, blue-tabbed binder across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. Mr. Harrison, Victor said smoothly, his voice a low, calming baritone designed to disarm. We are absolutely not here to fight you. We are not your enemy. We are here to show you who actually robbed you blind. Please, open the binder. Harrison hesitated, casting a skeptical glance at his own lawyer, who gave a brief nod. Harrison reached out and flipped the heavy cover open. Inside, meticulously organized, were the subpoenaed financial records Clara had managed to dig up, placed right alongside a high-resolution, enlarged copy of my stamped passport from Narita International Airport. The $750,000 in cash that you wired to the escrow account? Victor began, leaning forward slightly and steepling his fingers. It never went to Julian. It was intercepted by his brother, Felix. And if you turn to page 4 of that binder, you will see exactly where your hard-earned life savings went. Harrison reluctantly turned the page. I watched the color completely drain from his face in real time. The aggressive posture melted into a posture of sheer, sickening horror. He stared at the itemized bank statements. The documents showed hundreds of thousands of dollars bleeding out in rapid succession to offshore casinos, digital sports betting platforms, and luxury car dealerships. $400,000 of your money is already gone, Mr. Harrison. Blown on virtual blackjack and a brand new Porsche 911 Turbo S. Victor explained coldly, letting the numbers hang in the heavy air of the conference room. And right behind that statement is the absolute, undeniable federal proof that the power of attorney used to close your real estate sale was a felony forgery. Julian was physically standing in a customs line in Tokyo when that document was allegedly signed and notarized here in Texas. Legally speaking, the sale is void ab initio. That means, in the eyes of the law, it never happened. You do not own that house. But neither does Julian, technically, until a federal judge drops the gavel. You are a victim here, Mr. Harrison. You were targeted and defrauded, just like my client. Harrison looked up from the documents and stared at me. The aggressive, defensive anger was completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a devastating realization. He was a man coming to terms with the fact that his massive financial investment had been funneled straight into a gambling addict's black hole. My money, Harrison whispered, his voice trembling slightly. It is just gone? We managed to secure a federal freeze on roughly $300,000. I told him, keeping my voice calm, steady, and empathetic. But the rest is gone. Felix spent it in a matter of days. If you choose to fight me in court over the title, you are fighting the wrong person. We will inevitably win the house back, and you will be left with absolutely nothing but massive legal fees. But if you help me, if you join forces with us, we can get a massive civil judgment against Felix. You can recover your remaining funds from his frozen assets, and the court will garnish his future wages for the rest of his natural life to pay you back the rest. But if you side with him and fight this, you lose absolutely everything. Harrison was quiet for a long, agonizing minute. Then, he slammed his fist down on the mahogany table so hard the crystal water glasses violently rattled. That lying son of a bitch, Harrison spat, his face turning a deep, furious shade of red. Felix sat across from me in the closing room and looked me dead in the eye. He told me he was selling the property on your behalf because you were critically ill in a Japanese hospital and desperately needed the money for medical bills. He played me for an absolute fool. He is a master manipulator, I said quietly. He has been doing this his entire life. But we need your help to destroy his narrative. We need to know exactly what happened with the notary public. The woman who stamped the fake documents. Harrison's eyes narrowed as he desperately dug through his memory of the closing day. Penelope. Yeah. It was an incredibly weird interaction. She was a young, nervous woman working out of a strip mall shipping center. She was sweating and shaking the entire time we were at the closing table. She rushed me through the signing process and did not even ask for my identification until the very end. She looked terrified, like she wanted to run out of the room. I need you to testify to that exact behavior on the record, Victor said, closing the blue binder with a definitive snap. Help us nail the notary to the wall, and we strengthen the federal case to get your money back from my family's remaining liquidated assets. Harrison stood up, pushing his chair back, and extended his hand directly toward me. The animosity was completely gone, replaced by a shared thirst for brutal justice. I want that lying thief in handcuffs. Whatever you need from me, you have it. I shook his hand firmly. The enemy of my enemy was my greatest ally. With Harrison entirely on our side and his countersuit officially dropped, Victor unleashed his next, most lethal weapon. He immediately subpoenaed Penelope Vance, the 24-year-old notary public whose official seal had authorized the theft of my home, for an emergency mandatory deposition. We had her brought into the exact same glass-walled conference room the very next afternoon. Penelope walked in trying desperately to project an aura of professional confidence. She wore a cheap, ill-fitting blazer and carried a knockoff designer handbag, probably trying to emulate the wealthy, carefree aesthetic of women like my sister-in-law Stella. She sat down at the far end of the table, crossing her arms defensively, avoiding eye contact with both Victor and me. Victor did not offer her a glass of water. He did not engage in any polite small talk. He simply picked up the forged power of attorney and tossed it onto the table right in front of her. It slid across the polished wood and stopped perfectly at her fingertips. "Miss Vance," Victor said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, predatory octave, "we know for an absolute fact that you did not see Julian sign that document. We have federal immigration records proving he was 7,000 miles away in Tokyo on the exact date you stamped your official state seal on that paper." Penelope flinched violently, but she stubbornly tried to hold her ground. "I check government IDs for every single document I notarize. I do everything exactly by the book. Someone must have given me a highly sophisticated fake ID. I am a victim of identity theft here." Victor let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed loudly in the quiet room. "A fake ID? That is your grand defense? Let me explain reality to you, Miss Vance. Notary fraud that facilitates wire fraud across state and international lines is a severe federal offense. It carries significant mandatory prison time. When the district attorney sees this passport stamp, they are not going to care about your weak fake ID story. They are going to strip your notary commission, destroy your professional career, and put you in a federal facility for the next 5 to 10 years. But I am a reasonable man. You have exactly 2 choices right now. You can go to federal prison to protect Felix and Stella, or you can tell us the absolute, unvarnished truth right now, and I will personally recommend a full immunity deal to the prosecutor." The tough, defensive facade crumbled in less than 10 seconds. The sheer weight of reality crashed down on her. Penelope burst into heavy, hyperventilating sobs. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as her breathing became ragged. "His wife made me do it," Penelope cried out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate panic. "Stella. She came into my shipping shop right before closing. She gave me a thick envelope with $5,000 in crisp, untraceable cash. She said her brother-in-law was stuck out of the country and they needed this paperwork rushed to save his failing logistics business from total bankruptcy. She swore to me it was a completely victimless crime. She begged me to just stamp it. I was behind on my rent. I needed the money. And the signature?" Victor pressed, utterly relentless, refusing to let her breathe. "Who actually signed the name Julian?" "The husband," Penelope sobbed, wiping black streaks of mascara off her cheeks. "Felix. He signed it right there on my front counter while Stella handed me the cash envelope. I backdated the state stamp to the date they specifically told me to. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I sat in the corner of the room, feeling a sickening, twisting mix of disgust and dark triumph. Stella, the woman who was currently crying on Facebook about how cruel and heartless I was the exact mastermind who actively bribed a public official with dirty cash. They were not just greedy, opportunistic family members. They were calculated, premeditated criminals. The trap was now fully armed and locked. We had the passport. We had the staggering gambling records. We had the secret audio confession from my parents proving their absolute complicity. We had the cooperating, defrauded buyer. And we had the weeping, confessing notary. The smug, self-satisfied bubble my family was living in was about to burst in the most spectacular, devastating way imaginable. Because of the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of felony fraud and the immediate, pressing threat of the stolen funds disappearing completely into offshore accounts, the presiding judge agreed to an expedited summary judgment hearing on the title of the house. We did not have to wait agonizing months for a full trial. We were bypassing the bureaucracy and going straight into the courtroom. I woke up on the morning of the hearing feeling strangely hollow. There was absolutely no joy in what I was about to do. I was about to systematically destroy my own blood relatives in a court of law. But there was a deep, unshakable necessity burning in my chest. I showered, shaved carefully, and put on my best tailored charcoal suit. I tied a silk tie, making sure every detail of my appearance projected absolute control and unshakable resolve. I drove to the county courthouse in complete silence, refusing to turn on the radio. I walked into the massive, echoing courtroom and took my seat next to Victor at the plaintiff's table. The room smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and stale air conditioning. A few agonizing minutes later, the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and my family confidently walked in. They looked like they were attending a wealthy country club brunch rather than a federal legal hearing. Felix was wearing a flashy, incredibly expensive new suit that did not quite fit his frame correctly. Stella was holding her limited edition Louis Vuitton bag tightly, wearing large, obnoxious sunglasses pushed up on top of her perfectly styled hair. My parents, Richard and Martha, walked closely behind them, acting as their loyal entourage. They looked slightly nervous, but their chins were held high with an arrogant sense of superiority. They took their seats at the defense table on the opposing side of the aisle. Martha actively refused to look in my direction, keeping her gaze stubbornly fixed on the judge's empty bench. Felix, however, actually turned his head and shot me a smug, arrogant wink. He truly, deeply believed his fake paperwork was absolutely bulletproof. He believed that because he had gotten away with abusing me his entire life, the law would somehow bend to his will as well. Judge Montgomery entered the room. She was a stern, no-nonsense woman with sharp, angular features and a legendary reputation for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics or liars. She struck her heavy wooden gavel once, and the murmuring in the room fell completely dead silent. We are here regarding the emergency ex parte injunction and the title dispute over the property located at 4205 Oakwood Drive, Judge Montgomery announced, looking over her reading glasses at the gathered parties. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed. Victor stood up slowly, calmly buttoning his suit jacket. He did not waste a single second with emotional opening monologues. He did not plead for sympathy. He walked straight into the legal kill zone. Your Honor, Victor projected, his voice clear, authoritative, and echoing off the high ceiling. The defense aggressively claims that my client legally signed away his property via a power of attorney on October 27th. I direct your attention to Exhibit A. Victor handed a sealed, blue-tabbed folder to the court bailiff, who promptly passed it up to the judge. At the exact same time, Victor activated the courtroom projector. A massive, high-definition image of my passport page flashed onto the large screen behind the witness stand. The bright red Japanese immigration stamp was completely impossible to miss. The plaintiff, Julian, was 7,000 miles away on the exact date of the alleged signing. Victor stated coldly, his eyes locking onto the defense table. He landed at Narita International Airport in Tokyo. Unless the defense can explain to this court how my client successfully bypassed the laws of physics and geography, that notarized document is a complete, premeditated fabrication. A collective gasp swept through the small gallery. I watched Felix's smug, arrogant expression completely shatter into a million pieces. His jaw dropped open, and he aggressively leaned over to whisper frantically to his incredibly cheap, overwhelmed defense attorney. Stella's face turned the sickening color of wet chalk. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Exhibit B, Victor continued seamlessly, absolutely refusing to give them a single second to breathe or regroup. The sworn, notarized affidavit of Penelope Vance, the notary public who officially stamped the fraudulent document. Miss Vance admits, under penalty of perjury, that she accepted a $5,000 cash bribe from the defendant's wife, Stella, to illegally backdate the stamp. Furthermore, she personally witnessed Felix forge the plaintiff's signature on the counter of her shipping store. Objection! The defense attorney squeaked, standing up in a blind panic, his face glistening with sweat. This is hearsay, Your Honor. We have not had the opportunity to cross-examine this witness. It is a sworn affidavit from a cooperating witness currently seeking an active immunity deal with the district attorney's office. Victor countered sharply, not even looking at the opposing lawyer. It is entirely admissible for the purpose of this summary judgment. Overruled, Judge Montgomery snapped, glaring furiously at Felix. Sit down, counselor. Do not interrupt again unless you have a valid legal basis. Exhibit C. Victor pressed on, driving the final lethal nail into the coffin. The financial forensics. The defense publicly claimed the funds were used to start a family business. However, bank records show that the $750,000 from this fraudulent sale were systematically looted. Over $400,000 were wired directly to offshore sports betting sites by the defendant, Felix. The remainder was aggressively spent on luxury vehicles and designer goods within a 48-hour window. Stella let out a loud, theatrical sob, burying her face in her hands. But it was not her fake, carefully curated Facebook crying. This was raw, genuine terror. She knew in that exact moment that she was going to prison. "And finally, Your Honor," Victor said softly, the quietness of his voice drawing everyone's absolute attention. Exhibit D. The plaintiff recorded a conversation with his parents, Richard and Martha, who actively attempted to coerce him into dropping this lawsuit to protect the stolen funds. I ask the court's permission to play a brief, 10-second audio clip. "Proceed," the judge ordered, her expression turning incredibly dark. The audio echoed loudly through the courtroom speakers. My father's tired, defeated voice filled the room, incredibly clear. "We knew he was practicing your signature, Julian. We saw him doing it at the kitchen table. But we thought it was just to speed the paperwork up." The silence that followed the recording was incredibly heavy, thick, and suffocating. Judge Montgomery slowly took off her reading glasses. She did not look at the lawyers. She looked past Felix and locked her furious eyes directly with my parents sitting in the gallery. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. and Mrs. Riley," Judge Montgomery said, her voice dripping with absolute venom, "your recorded admission of prior knowledge makes you morally, if not legally, complicit in the total financial ruin and betrayal of your own son. You sat back, watched one child systematically rob the other, and then you tried to manipulate the victim into silence to protect a criminal. It is utterly, comprehensively shameful." Martha put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Richard stared blankly down at his shoes, looking like a man who had just been completely destroyed by his own actions. The judge did not need to retreat to her chambers to deliberate. The evidence was absolute. She picked up her heavy fountain pen and began signing the legal orders right there on the bench. "The court finds the power of attorney to be a blatant, undeniable forgery." Judge Montgomery ruled decisively, her voice ringing out like a bell. "The transfer of the property is void ab initio." The sharp, metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around Felix's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. It echoed through the room like a gunshot. "And you?" Judge Montgomery pointed her heavy wooden gavel directly at Stella, who was frozen in horror. "You are to remain in this building. Officers are waiting outside those doors to detain you for questioning regarding the felony bribery of a public official." "Do not touch me!" Stella shrieked hysterically as a female officer firmly grabbed her arm. "I have severe anxiety. You cannot do this to me. I am a mother. My social media following will hear about this." As the bailiffs aggressively dragged Felix down the center aisle toward the holding cells, he fought against their grip and looked back at me. His eyes were incredibly wide with primal, unadulterated terror. The untouchable golden child, the man who had tormented me for 30 years, was finally facing a consequence he could not smile or charm his way out of. "Julian, please," Felix begged, tears streaming rapidly down his red face, his voice cracking. "Help me. I am your brother. Do not let them do this to me." I just watched him. I did not smile. I did not frown. I felt absolutely no pity. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the mahogany table, watching the monster who stole my life being dragged away in chains. My mother, Martha, rushed to the wooden railing separating the gallery from the court floor, screaming at the top of her lungs at me. "You monster! You did this! You destroyed this entire family! I hope you rot in that big empty house all alone. I curse the day you were born." I slowly turned to Victor, completely ignoring her screaming. "Are we done here?" "We are officially done," Victor said, snapping his heavy briefcase shut with a deeply satisfied click. "Next week, we file the aggressive civil suits against your parents for the remainder of Harrison's unrecovered restitution. They will likely lose their house, their cars, and their retirement accounts to pay him back. They will be left with nothing." "Good," I said softly. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, walked past my screaming, hysterical mother without breaking eye contact or flinching, and pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the bright, blinding Texas sunlight. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from the explosive courtroom showdown was incredibly swift and absolutely brutally total. When you finally shatter a family dynamic built entirely on decades of lies, manipulation, and financial abuse, the pieces do not just fall quietly to the ground. They violently explode, taking every single enabler down with them. 6 months later, the suffocating dust had finally settled on the criminal proceedings. Felix, facing a staggering mountain of federal evidence and the terrifying prospect of a decade in a maximum security prison, completely folded under the pressure. The arrogant bravado vanished. He took a brutal, non-negotiable plea deal offered by the district attorney. He was sentenced to 3 agonizing years in a state penitentiary, followed by 5 years of incredibly strict, monitored probation. He is now, and will forever be, a convicted felon. When he eventually gets out of that concrete box, his life as he knew it will be over. He will never be legally allowed to work in the finance sector, he will never be approved for a standard mortgage or business loan, and he will never regain the shiny, arrogant, wealthy lifestyle he fundamentally believed he was entitled to. He traded his brother's love for a Porsche he got to drive for 2 weeks, and it cost him his entire future. Stella, true to her parasitic, opportunistic nature, turned on him the literal second the handcuffs clicked in that courtroom. She officially filed for divorce while Felix was sitting in the miserable, overcrowded county jail awaiting his final transfer to the state prison. In her desperate legal filings, she aggressively claimed he emotionally abused and coerced her into participating in the fraud, playing the victim card one last time. The prosecutor did not completely buy her fake tears, especially with the notary's damning testimony about the cash bribe. But because it was technically her first offense, she managed to strike a desperate deal. She received 3 years of heavily monitored probation, a massive financial fine she absolutely could not afford, and a permanent criminal record that would show up on every background check for the rest of her life. She frantically packed whatever designer clothes the court had not seized, abandoned the expensive leased apartment she could no longer pay for, and completely fled the state. Last I heard through the grapevine, the woman who once bragged about her offshore investments was working as a front desk receptionist at a low-end gym in a strip mall, completely stripped of the luxury lifestyle and social media status she craved more than oxygen. But my parents, Richard and Martha, suffered the most fitting, poetic fate of all. Because they had actively enabled the fraud, and because the frozen $300,000 was not nearly enough to pay back Mr. Harrison fully, Harrison's aggressive legal team ruthlessly sued my parents for the remaining balance. In order to settle the massive, looming debt and avoid total, devastating bankruptcy, Richard and Martha had to completely liquidate everything they owned. They drained their 401k retirement accounts, eating massive, brutal tax penalties in the process. When that liquid cash was not enough to satisfy the hungry lawyers, the court forced them to sell their own home. The exact house I grew up in, the place where Felix broke my toys and my parents broke my spirit. They had to pack up 30 years of memories into cardboard boxes and move into a cramped, depressing 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown, incredibly unsafe part of town. Their hard-earned retirement savings were entirely decimated by legal fees, court costs, and massive restitution payments. The social isolation, however, was the final, agonizing nail in their coffin. Once the extended family, their friends, and their judgmental church group learned the actual truth about the felony forgery, the massive gambling addiction, and the brutal betrayal of their youngest son, everyone simply stopped calling. The same Aunt Beatrice who had viciously attacked me on Facebook suddenly pretended she never even knew them. My parents were left entirely alone in that tiny, dark apartment, surrounded only by their toxic bitterness and the crushing, unavoidable consequences of blindly favoring the wrong son. As for me, the court moved swiftly, and I officially got my house back. I drove up to the sprawling property the very day after the title was officially restored to my legal name. The fancy, high-tech electronic smart lock was gone, violently drilled out and replaced by a standard, heavy-duty metal deadbolt installed by the court's locksmith. I slid the new brass key into the lock, turned it, and walked inside. The house was completely, utterly silent. The terrible, generic beige paint was still covering my beautiful walls. The faint, lingering smell of Mr. Harrison's cheap deli sandwiches seemed to permanently haunt the kitchen. I slowly walked through the empty, echoing rooms, my footsteps sounding incredibly loud against the polished oak floors. I stood in the massive living room, looking out the large bay windows at the backyard where my expensive, carefully tended rose bushes used to be. I stood there for a very long time. I waited to feel triumphant. I waited to feel the overwhelming rush of happiness, security, and pride that I had sacrificed 3 grueling years in Tokyo to achieve. I waited for the brick shield to wrap around me and make me feel safe. But I felt absolutely nothing, just a hollow, echoing emptiness. The house was not a beautiful sanctuary anymore. It was a tainted crime scene. It was a massive, expensive monument to my family's ultimate betrayal. Every dark shadow in the hallway looked like Felix lurking around, searching for something else to steal. Every creak of the floorboards sounded exactly like my mother's voice yelling at me to stop being so greedy. I realized with a heavy heart that my brick shield had completely failed. You cannot build a physical fortress strong enough to keep out the people you blindly invite inside. I walked out to the hot, stuffy garage, where the court officers had unceremoniously dumped the few personal belongings they managed to recover from Felix's rented storage unit. I opened a damaged cardboard box. Inside was my framed college diploma. The protective glass was entirely shattered. The expensive wooden frame snapped violently in half. At the bottom of the box were my precious childhood photo albums, covered in a thick layer of dust and grime, carelessly tossed aside so Felix could make room for his stolen money and luxury goods. They did not just sell my house. They treated my entire existence, my entire history, like garbage. They did not care about my memories, my achievements, or my pain. To them, I was just an annoying obstacle standing between them and a massive payout. I carefully reached down and picked up a bent, faded photograph of me and my grandfather, the only person in the entire family who had ever truly encouraged me to study hard and build a life. I held the torn picture to my chest. I bought a sprawling, beautiful, untouched plot of land in the Pacific Northwest, nestled deep in the rugged mountains, surrounded by ancient, towering pine trees and overlooking a quiet, glass-like lake. I hired local contractors and built a custom wooden cabin from the ground up. It was modern, cozy, incredibly efficient, and perfectly designed. But most importantly, it was built exactly for one person. There are absolutely no guest rooms. There is no large dining table designed for massive, fake family gatherings. It is a space entirely dedicated to my peace, my solitude, and my healing. I did not retire, though. I am a financial engineer at heart, and I genuinely love the complex puzzle of numbers. I took a high-level, incredibly lucrative position at a prestigious firm in downtown Seattle. The corporate culture there is vastly different from the brutal grind of Tokyo or the toxic expectations of my family. My new boss, a senior partner named Gregory, deeply respects my boundaries. When I told him during the interview that I strictly log off at 6 o'clock every evening to go hike in the mountains, he simply nodded and said my mental health was my absolute best asset to the company. For the first time in my entire professional life, I am actively valued for my deep expertise and my mind, not aggressively exploited for my endless endurance and my wallet. Yesterday afternoon, I walked down to the end of my long, winding gravel driveway to check the metal mailbox. Mixed in with the standard catalogs, local flyers, and utility bills was a plain, slightly crumpled white envelope. There was no return address written in the corner, but I instantly, painfully recognized the sharp, aggressive handwriting on the front. It was from my mother, Martha. I stood on my wooden porch, the cool mountain breeze rustling the pine needles above me, looking out at the mist rolling gently over the quiet lake, holding the envelope in my hand. I did not need to tear it open to know exactly what was written inside on those pages. I knew there would be heavy, manipulative guilt trips. I knew there would be aggressively quoted Bible verses about the absolute necessity of forgiveness and a child's holy duty to their parents. There would be desperate, crying pleas for money because their apartment rent was unexpectedly increasing, or because Richard needed specialized medical care they could no longer afford on their decimated income. There would inevitably be vicious accusations that I had cruelly and heartlessly abandoned the very people who gave me life and raised me. My thumb slowly traced the edge of the sealed flap. A few years ago, the desperate, unloved child hiding deep inside me would have frantically ripped it open, desperately searching the ink for a genuine apology that would never come, ultimately feeling crushing guilt for their self-inflicted suffering. I did not open it. I walked over to the large stone fire pit in my backyard, where I was already burning some dry brush and broken branches. The flames were crackling brightly, radiating intense heat in the cold mountain air. I held the sealed envelope directly over the center of the fire. I watched the thick white paper begin to rapidly curl at the edges, turn a dark, scorched brown, and then suddenly burst into a brilliant, consuming orange flame. I watched the manipulative words I would never read turn to fragile, weightless gray ash and float up into the clean, crisp, unforgiving sky. I realized in that exact, beautifully quiet moment that I had not lost a family. You cannot possibly lose something you never genuinely had in the first place. I had successfully escaped a financial and emotional cult. I had finally escaped a parasitic system specifically designed to drain me completely dry just to keep a useless golden child afloat. I sat down in my heavy, comfortable Adirondack chair, wrapped a thick blanket around my shoulders, and took a deep, satisfying sip of my strong black coffee. The silence of the vast pine forest was heavy, but it was absolutely not lonely. It was the most peaceful, healing sound I had ever heard. For the first absolute time in my 30 years on this chaotic earth, I did not owe anyone a single thing. I was not a resource. I was not a walking ATM. I was not a second-class brother, and I was not an ungrateful son. I was just Julian, and for the first time in my entire life, simply being Julian was completely, wonderfully enough. It took losing absolutely everything I thought I desperately wanted to finally realize that I already had everything I truly needed right within myself. I learned the hard, brutal way that true family is absolutely not defined by shared blood, DNA, or shared last names. Blood merely makes you related. Genuine loyalty, mutual respect, and unconditional care are what actually make you a family. If someone constantly uses your desperate love as a weapon to extract your hard-earned wealth, they are not your family. They are a parasite. And aggressively removing them from your life is not cruel. It is absolutely essential for your own survival. So, let me ask you this. Am I the heartless villain for letting my parents lose their entire home and sending my own brother to rot in a concrete prison cell? Or was I simply holding up a mirror and letting them destroy themselves with their own insatiable greed? Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to draw a brutal, unforgiving boundary to protect your own sanity, your wealth, and your future? Share your story in the comments below. We read them, and your incredible courage helps others realize they are not alone in these dark battles. And please, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journey. Thank you so much for listening.